Kiki? I don't think we should talk about this book as questions. Okay. What? What do we... Dads. Honey, that's not what it's talking about. Oh, okay. Welcome back to Channels by Kiki. I'm your host, not your dad, Kiki. In honor of my quarter-life crisis, I'm going through some self-help books to figure out whether or not they can really be helpful, especially as a Christian. Last week I talked about Ecclesiastes, which is not a self-help book, but it was very helpful to myself. This week we will actually be digging into self-help books made to help people help themselves. Today I'll be talking about Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is basically Robert Kiyosaki's Proverbs, but about money. He offers us 7 basic principles in regards to our understanding of our own finances. These principles are: the rich don't work for money, why teach financial literacy, mind your own business, the history of taxes and the power of corporations, the rich invent money, work to learn, don't work for money, and overcoming obstacles. And then the 8th chapter is about getting started. So I'm gonna be honest with you. Going into the book, I was very cynical. I said to myself,
well, this guy's like really rich. Why would he want to help people get rich? It's probably just gonna be a book about him condescending us, telling us about not going to Starbucks, or don't get into debt, or investment tips. It's just...
And if there was one thing this book did, it was disappoint the cynic in me. Now, I won't be going chapter by chapter of what I thought was helpful, what I liked. Instead, I will talk about some of the points that I thought were really helpful. And aside from that, just encourage you to go to your library or get this book and read it, and let's talk about it in the comments. These are some of my biggest takeaways. The importance of education. So this book is comparing Robert Kiyosaki's 2 father figures. The first was his actual biological father, who was a very intelligent man, was highly educated, a doctor, I believe, but who always seemed to struggle with money. His paycheck would increase, but his troubles would not leave him. The other dad is a father figure who took young Robert under his wing. This dad was not highly educated in the formal sense, but he knew how to handle money. The kind of education Robert Kiyosaki is pushing is not necessarily a formal education. He wants you to learn how to teach yourself. One of the first lessons that Rich Dad taught young Robert was how to learn from life. Remember how in Ecclesiastes we talked about the separation of the work we do and the fruit of our labor? Robert does tap into that a little bit. Work to learn, don't work to earn. Distinguishing your goal in working from a paycheck to learning, the value you get out of that job is different. It means that no matter where you work, you can get something out of it, because what you're getting out of it is experience and education. If you're having trouble at work, learn how to get over it. You don't like what you're getting paid? Learn how to negotiate. Your boss is offering you the ability to learn in other areas, but maybe you don't quite get the pay you want. You can use everything to your advantage, because your greatest asset is your mind. Being the kind of person who can solve your own problems will be such a great value to you. Speaking of problems, overcoming obstacles. That's the title for chapter 7, Overcoming Obstacles. Going along with taking every advantage to learn and to grow and to adapt, this is one of the things you have to adapt to. But the ability to look at making mistakes or taking risk or loss not as something to be avoided, but something that makes you grow. One of the points he stresses in this chapter is that you must learn how to manage risk, because you won't live life without at some point having taken a risk. Every rich person at some point has lost, and probably lost big. You hear stories all the time where at some point in their life they were in a garage, living with their parents, just in massive debt or whatever, trying to make things work, taking those big risks. But Robert says he knows a lot of poor people who don't take any risk. And that in itself is a pretty big risk. Maybe at some point later I'll talk about Dopamine Nation, but I will say one of the points made in that book, chemically, scientifically, when you pursue something that causes you pain or discomfort, there's usually a resulting dopamine kick afterwards. But people who pursue pleasure, pain is always on the other side of that, because those two things are connected. So pairing pain and pleasure with that risk management, with not being afraid to make mistakes. It is so important that you learn how to be someone who can do the things you don't want to do. and learn how to make mistakes, learn how to learn from them, and learn how to recover from loss, especially if you're young. Learn how to do that while you're younger so it's not as scary when you're older.
Minding your own business.
I find that in reading certain self-help books or trying to be an adult, it feels like I'm opening up just can after can of worms. And it's so hard to sort through them all. I'm just trying to live my daily life and I just got worms everywhere. What it pricks in my mind is, see how much more you know? Think about how much more you don't know. Think about what you're already doing and think about all the things that you really need to be doing. You think you're learning now? Oh, there's so much more you need to learn. And that's really stressful. There's just so many worms. Books like this made me have to get a can of worms room. So when I read books like this or when I'm challenged by certain things that I need to get ahead on, I take it to my can of worms room and I just open everything. Maybe I take a few mental notes and then I pick out a couple of worms that I can handle right now, this day, this week, or pursue this year. Otherwise, I just put them back in their cans, seal it up, and then I close the door and then I go make dinner. Probably the biggest worm that I keep on my chest that I got from this book was how I need to be responsible for myself. This is not a particular point he makes in the book, but it is the ultimate call of this book. As Rich Dad in one of the first chapter was giving him a slice of life, this little guy was just like, that's not fair, this is your fault. And one of the points Rich Dad made was, if you keep blaming me, Rich Dad, for all your problems, you are robbing yourself of the power to solve them. And that hurt me a little bit. Because if you look at TikTok, if you look at the news, if you look at anything nowadays, it's always people blaming other people for all the problems in the world. But something that this book touches, that we can go to the Bible and confirm, is that your biggest problem in this world is you, is your sin problem. Robert Kiyosaki cannot touch your sin problems, but Jesus can. So one of the things this book really encouraged me to do was to counter the propaganda that it's always someone else's problem and to take responsibility for my life, for my decisions, and for my future. And that is just a big old can of worms, and that's hard to chew, but it's so necessary. So as I'm reading these books, as I'm approaching them as a Christian, the two biggest questions I ask myself is, where is this book coming from and where is it leading me? In this case, this book is coming from Mr. Kiyosaki, but not just his own magical thinking on life, it's coming from his years of experience, and he has the money to pay the bills on that part. But he's not necessarily a believer, and he is not pointing you to Jesus. So use discernment, grain of salt. Now, where is he leading you to? The three things that come to mind is you, to be responsible. That's one. You to be active and living in the world. And the third thing is to buy other books or play the games that he recommends or, his own stuff, because that's how these self-help books things work. With my Christian filter on, there were really only 2 points that I felt, it's not like he's wrong, but just some discernment. One of those areas we need a filter on is debt. Mr. Kiyosaki is not against debt. What he worries about is how much taxes and debt work against the middle class while the rich use it to their advantage, so he just wants you to be careful and be wise about it. But what does the Bible have to say on that? Romans 13:8 says this, "Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." But Paul is speaking to a church. Is he talking between Christians? Is he talking in general? Proverbs 22:26-27 says, "Be not one of those who gives pledges, who put up security for debt. If you have nothing which to pay, why should your bed be taken from under you?" But Proverbs aren't necessarily commands, they're words of wisdom. And in exactly this thing, it's just saying, if you don't have anything, why would you ask for more money and then have what little you have be taken from you? So I don't know, those are just the first verses that popped up when I looked up what does the Bible have to say on debt on Google. If you're someone who's more theologically grounded or just more theologically grounded on this issue, I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. The only other warning I would give is don't just read this book and then just start throwing money at things. Don't try to get rich quick. I got some more Proverbs for you. Proverbs 13:11. "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it." And this last little nugget I'll throw at you, which Mr. Kiyosaki also touches on a little bit, but let's go to the Word of God to be fully grounded on this issue. Matthew 6:24. "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." Robert's point on this issue, which I think is good to bring up, that both the rich and the poor can be servants of money. Both someone with a lot of money and someone with very little money can be very afraid of losing what they have. Don't act in fear. Don't pursue money. Don't let that be your highest value in life. However, Jesus talks about money a lot. So learning how to be wise with what we have, learning how to be generous, how to save up an inheritance for our kids, which Proverbs also says is what godly people do. And it's something that eventually I want to learn more about. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad gets 3 whole stars from me, 3 out of 3. 1 for likability, 2 because it was helpful, and 3 because I would recommend it. If you've read this book, go to the comments. Let's talk about it. What did you like? What did you not like? If I have encouraged you to read this book, go ahead and subscribe, because next week we'll be talking about another self-help book. I'm gonna just go ahead and tell you what it is. It's The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. And boy, is it a doozy. But you'll just have to wait till then.